Welcome to another edition of the Game Preview Podcast. Ethan Greenberg, Cynthia Frelund, Jets Steelers Week 4 in Pittsburgh. And this is a totally different Steelers team that I think than people are going to be used to, at least. We're going to talk about that. But this is the news, Cynthia. Diving right into the first quarter here, Robert Saleh spoke to the media probably a little less than 2 hours ago and said that Zach Wilson, if all goes well, will start for the New York Jets on Sunday, make his Season 2 debut. How does that change the complexity from your eyes of maybe what the Jets want to do offensively?
Well, there's a couple of things that look different. The first is no matter what, it takes a moment for any quarterback on any team ever. I don't care if it's Tom Brady, who's been in the league for like 7 billion years. It takes a little bit for that chemistry to form. So it's going to be very important that those shorter passes, probably to running backs, which clearly we saw with Breece Hall this past week with Joe Flacco, those are the types of things, like get it going nice and slow. You've seen it with Tua Tagovailoa having success this year. You've seen it with with Mac Jones, with Daniel Jones, everyone named Jones. They are all having success starting a little bit more conservatively and then building upon that. So I think that don't be surprised if we see a little bit of conservatism to start and then adding in some of those deeper and more tricky things later on.
Right, and of course, to help a young quarterback, especially after missing 6 weeks, hasn't played since really, I guess you could count the preseason opener, but that's when he got hurt. So I guess you really can't even count that to a degree. So here's the thing. Something that could help him is the Jets' running game, but the Jets' offensive line continues to be in flux. George Fant goes down to injured reserve. That means that there's going to be some shuffling up front. The Steelers' defensive line, even without T.J. Watt, very good. What kind of challenge is it for Zach Wilson just to have chemistry, not even with the skill players, but really make sure that everyone in front of him is protecting him? Well,
I think that is going to be, look, the strength of the Steelers team is absolutely their defense, their defensive front, and then add Minkah Fitzpatrick into that as well. But it's going to be about a little bit about scheme, a little bit about getting the run game going. It's going to be about finding those areas. The team is different. The Steelers are different without TJ Watt. It does help a little bit. You know, they still have a lot of Pro Bowlers, all pros, guys who are potentially Hall of Famers on the front of that defense. But outside zone rushing could be a help. And I do think that Robert Saleh is uniquely positioned to help orchestrate what the right thing to do here is, because he knows a thing or two about bringing the heat. So that's an opportunity here for, like I said, conservative, short game plans, figuring out how to read the defense a little bit so you can find those moments where there is no pressure or there's less pressure for Zach Wilson to operate with.
How about Zach Wilson's mobility being a factor in potentially masking certain problems for an offensive line? Like, do you think that Joe Flacco, being 37 years old, not the most mobile guy, like you think adding someone who's youthful and definitely has mobility like Zach Wilson could potentially mask some issues if there are up front?
It absolutely could. And that does absolutely help. I mean, you've seen a lot of the quarterbacks that have come out of college in the past 5 seasons are far better at throwing on the run than the guys who came out 6 to 10 years before that. So when I look to see, okay, yes, that does help. The problem or the situation is you need to be able to read the defense first, right? And then you can run in strategic locations that make the most sense. So don't be surprised if they're not expecting Zach to do a ton with his feet, even though he is super athletic. It's not a knock on him. It's let's see what we've got here to read it first so that you kind of prevent the opportunity for injuries. You want to run where it makes sense. You don't just want to run and scramble where it doesn't make sense.
And, of course, Zach Wilson had 4 rushing touchdowns in his last 7 games of last season. Going back to that point, though, Cynthia, we kind of saw a jump from Zach Wilson from the first set of games to the final 7 after his right knee injury last season. What are you expecting from Zach Wilson in year 2 with an offense once he's fully comfortable and the chemistry's there that's better at pretty much every single level?
This is the league's, I know it's only 3 games through, but number 5 in terms of passing offense. That's a pretty stark contrast from last season. There's a lot more pass catchers that are creating a lot of opportunities. You see a lot of separation. You see Tyler Conklin becoming a really useful piece of this offense as well. Like, there's a lot of things to really like here and opportunities in a lot of different, Breece Hall and those short passes, that's going to be a key to all of this. I expect a big step forward for Zach Wilson, but like I said, it makes the most sense strategically for it to be rolled out in a smart way to start conservative and then build on that, as opposed to asking him and putting him in situations where he's going to be expected to just not strategically throw deep. You don't want to be in 3rd and 17. You got to be in like 3rd and 1. Then you could take a deep shot. It's a little bit different value proposition against defenses. And the Steelers defense, outside of, the front is very strong, and Minkah Fitzpatrick, they have some points of vulnerability, the 22nd ranked passing defense.
Yeah, I think it's going to be fascinating just to see kind of what you were talking about, like assuming Zach Wilson is starting Sunday, if all goes well this week, then yeah, you hope so, of course. But like this is what Jets fans have been waiting for, to see Zach Wilson in year 2 with a new tight end room. You mentioned Conklin, CJ Uzomah, and Jeremy Ruckert new. Garrett Wilson's been coming on strong. Breece Hall in the backfield. Not to mention the guys that he played with last year, like Elijah Moore and Michael Carter. Like, there are a lot of pieces here once it comes together for Zach Wilson and this offense. I'm hoping, and Jets fans are hoping, that there's going to be a significant jump. And that leads us to our second quarter. You mentioned the Pittsburgh Steelers. This Steelers team, I know you talked about their defense and their front end, as well as Minkah Fitzpatrick. It doesn't feel like the Pittsburgh Steelers that a lot of people are familiar with. Is that a fair statement?
I think all around it doesn't feel like the Pittsburgh Steelers team that we're used to. Obviously, we'll talk about the other side of the ball there too, but all of those things work together. Football is has so much complementary. I couldn't say that word for a second. The fact that you have the defense kind of, like you saw in the first game, they looked absolutely like they were lights out against Joe Burrow. But remember, those 4 turnovers by Joe Burrow and 5 for the team, like 4 interceptions, like sometimes you get in a situation where once you've thrown 2 interceptions, like now you're in a high probability of throwing another one because you're in these obvious passing situations. That being said, there's a lot of things with this Steelers defense that they're not quite as quick. Obviously, no TJ Watt makes a huge difference in that, but they're not getting as much burst off the line of scrimmage as we're used to from them. We're used to them just being vicious, and they're vicious, but it does take a little bit of sting out of it without TJ coming off the edge. But it just feels like we're seeing a muted version of the Steelers compared to what we typically see from them.
Yeah, and in place of TJ Watt, not even in place, but Alex Highsmith, 4.5 sacks, leads the NFL. So it's not like TJ Watt has dissipated and so has the Steelers pass rush. TJ Watt's dealing with his own injury, but the Steelers pass rush still very much a factor. Also, this is a crazy stat that we looked up the other day as we were having some fun in the office. The Pittsburgh Steelers have led the NFL or tied for the league lead in sacks each season from 2017 through last year, which is incredible. That's an incredible run. Obviously, TJ Watt has a lot to do with that, but without him, the Steelers haven't won a game. They're 0-6 without TJ Watt in the lineup. What's the recipe here to beat the Steelers?
The recipe is to keep everything in manageable downs and distances. I like this fun stat. It's not highly predictive, but the Steelers are 1-8 when they've allowed at least 20 points since the beginning of last season. So it's like, okay, we'll just score 21 points then, right? Obviously. But the reality is the teams that have been able to score that much, they have been keeping themselves in manageable downs and distances and thinking about time of possession and keeping the ball so that you're forcing the other side of that ball, which has some question marks with the quarterback position, force them to make some mistakes, right? So the reality is to find drives that are sustained, that are, limit. It's the same thing every quarter. No turnovers, 3rd down percentage, good in the red area, those types of things. But the reality is keep everything in manageable downs and distances so you're not doing anything high risk, because the Steelers defense is a bit high risk, high reward. There's a reason I think it's 25th against the pass, 22nd against, like these, the 25th and 22nd or whatever, the opposite ways. You can create some yards on these guys, but you can also create some turnovers. So the reality is stay away from high risk reward stuff. Go for more like things that are tried and true, not vanilla. It's not boring. I'm not saying be boring. I'm saying more just get easy wins on 1st down, 2nd down, 3rd down.
I'm glad you mentioned the stat that I'm about to repeat, just because I think it's worth repeating. The Steelers are 1-8 in games they allow more than 20 points since 2021. That's really 21. So score 21. It's an incredible stat because it really shows how good that defense has been, like on the flip side, but also kind of shows that they haven't been able to win the shootout games. And you think about what the Steelers have been historically, and it feels like they're good defense and they always find a way to win. That is a very interesting number. And also, like, this is a much different team in so many facets, which leads us to the third quarter and the Steelers quarterback, Mitch Trubisky.
We didn't have halftime? No halftime?
Oh, you're right. I messed up. That's on me. All right, we got to do I'm getting yelled at by you. I'm getting yelled at by our producer. You're right.
Exactly.
You're right.
Halftime. You know what?
Okay.
We got to go in the locker rooms. We got to regroup. We've got to change our strategy if things aren't working. Like, come on. That's the whole thing. I need a sip of coffee.
Little neck crack. All right, I'm back. I had a moment. I slipped. What are we talking about? You got something that you want to bring up here?
I think I want to talk about the fact that this is through 3 games overall, league-wide, the entire league, not just one particular team. This is the fewest points we've seen through 3 weeks since 2010. What were you doing in 2010? Were you in middle school? Like, what was going on?
In 2010, I was not in middle school. I was a sophomore in high school, and my dean, who was my dean? In 10th grade, I think was Miss Sanders. And I was in high school and playing baseball. Oh, no, 2010. Yeah, no, baseball was in the spring. So that would, I guess I would have been, yep. No, I still would have been playing baseball. And that's what I was doing. That's my 2010.
I was living in Hoboken in 2010.
Wow. I was wondering where Cynthia Frelund was in the United States in 2010.
I was in Hoboken. Yep. I lived on 13th Street. I'm not going to say the address because I don't know who lives there now, but I lived on 13th Street in Hoboken. I loved it. I used to take the ferry to work. I was working at the NFL league office. I used to take the ferry. It was like my happiest 8 minutes of the day. It was great.
When you lived in Hoboken, did you live by the water or did you have a nice little walk to the water to take the ferry?
Not far from the water. From the water. Yep. Like maybe 3 blocks. Not bad.
And also, just to really bring this full circle, first of all, our producer, Matt Sitkoff, says in 2010 he was working at ESPN, living in Connecticut.
I did that after. I moved to Connecticut at, let's see, I think I was like 14. Yeah.
All right.
So it's all full circle.
Let's bring this full circle now because I live in Hoboken, but I live downtown Hoboken.
I like Hoboken. I'm going to come visit you there. I'm like a big Hoboken fan.
You are always welcome to Hoboken.
Oh, you be careful what you wish for.
Okay, so let's talk. Before we get into the third quarter, as I rudely skipped over halftime, what was Cynthia Frelund's favorite restaurant in Hoboken circa 2010?
Wow, that's a really hard question.
And for those who don't know, like Hoboken's very Italian and it's known for sandwiches, which isn't really like a dinner move, but
I'm going to have to get back to you on that because I have a lot of favorites. Like I ate a lot when I lived there because I like food and I was younger, so I could eat even more than I eat now, which is pretty impressive.
I think that's why I live there now. I love food.
It's
you cook,
so
you make your Thursday night meals. I make some Jets meals and we get after it.
Perfect. So, I love it. I'll have to get back to you. I'll have to think about which one was my favorite. I've just talked to some of my friends and see which one was my favorite.
Yeah. Okay. That will be for next week on the Game Preview podcast.
Homework. Who doesn't love homework, you know?
Miss Frelund is assigning homework. Is that what's happening?
Oh, yes. Miss Cynthia, actually. You asked me before, and we should bring this up. Newsflash, my neighbor, my very cute neighbor who talks to me about one of the Jets players came up to me. He's like, Miss Cynthia, did Sheldon win this week? I'm going to start lying to him. If it doesn't happen, I'm just going to be like, yep, he did. What's this kid going to know? He can't Google yet. He probably has a phone, actually. Maybe
that's fair. But then you'd be lying to him, and that wouldn't be very nice.
But then he's happier.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, well, and if you're just tuning in, this neighbor, Sheldon, is really Sheldon Rankins. So that he just refers to Sheldon Rankins as Sheldon. You know what? I want to find Sheldon. I'm going to find Sheldon Rankins in the locker room one of these days and tell him that your neighbor calls him Sheldon.
I'm like, Sheldon Rankins is so chill. He'd probably like, checks out. Like, he's just a very chill person. Yeah. So.
Okay. All right.
Definitely do that.
That was a fantastic halftime. Thank you for getting me right because I know, I did. That's on me. I will never let it happen again. Mistakes are okay, but we don't make the same mistakes twice here on the Game Preview podcast, which leads us to the third quarter. We were talking about the Steelers team being different. Ben Roethlisberger, obviously no longer a part of this team. Mitch Trubisky, the starting quarterback. Through 3 games, Cynthia, what have you thought of the way that Mitch Trubisky and the Steelers offense has played?
Well, you talk about those passes on the run. Almost a quarter of his passes have been attempted on the run, which is interesting. I guess what I'm trying to say is this is not an impressive offensive line. And by the way, just so everyone's keeping track at home, Trubisky has the second highest percentage of passes thrown on the run, second to Daniel Jones. So interesting note there. I think that this team has some great pieces. Like Deontay Johnson's probably a bit underrated. They haven't been able to get Najee Harris going the way that they would need him to go. And it's probably the case where, like, when will we see, and I hate this like argument, when will we see Kenny Pickett and like, you know, but really kind of when will we see Kenny Pickett? Because look, like the offense is bottom 5 in the NFL in total yards per game, yards per play, passing yards per game, passing yards per attempt, and first downs per game. So if all of those things are in the bottom 5, sometimes you see a change. And it's not even necessarily Mitch Trubisky's fault, but I do think that this O-line has let him down considerably.
Well, going off the O-line point, I feel like a lot of people thought that the Steelers are going to hand the ball to Najee Harris and they're going to let him do his thing, and then that's how they're going to create big plays. Do you think that the offensive line basically hasn't allowed Najee to do this? Because Najee last year was a top 5 statistical running back in terms of rushing yards.
I think it's possible that, I don't know what banged up means, right? I don't know what percentage healthy he is. You know, you saw him come out of games. His injuries are not something to mess around with. I think that if he were a bit more healthy, it might look a little bit, I don't know. I'm not a doctor, and he's not saying. I can just observe the speed is not as fast as it was. And we've heard about injuries. So it feels like perhaps some of it's that, but also some of it is on the structure of what they're calling, right? Like we've seen some interesting passes to Deontay Johnson, and then Big Pat Freiermuth. I don't know who started calling him Big Pat, but Big Pat Freiermuth, has been very helpful. But it just doesn't seem like they have the creativity with some of the ways that you've seen some of these other guys get going, right? Like the Tuas, obviously it helps when you have the Tua's arsenal, but the Steelers have pretty good receivers in terms of their receiving core. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how this evolves and if Kenny Pickett does start soon.
I know that you don't like the argument, but I feel like because we're talking about Kenny Pickett, I'm just curious, what were your pre-draft thoughts on Kenny Pickett? And obviously this was a quarterback class that wasn't viewed as the same way that its 10 predecessors were.
Yeah. Well, by the way, one thing that I should add here, which is probably my favorite stat, or my favorite 2 stats on this Pittsburgh offense, they have the highest rate of 3-and-outs in the league at 31.4%. Niche Geet. And then the next one is only 4 offensive touchdowns scored so far.
Yeah. But both, and before you get into Kenny Pickett, both of those stats right there, probably, I think if you're a Jets fan, you're thinking about the way that this defense has performed, particularly on third down, because Robert Saleh said that's where the crux of the issues are right now. The Jets, they let up all of their touchdowns they let up last week against the Bengals. Third down plays. The Jets right now 31st in the league in third down defense. Do you think that this has the potential to be I'm using air quotes if you're listening to the podcast, a get right game, like a recalibration of the defense?
I think it has I think both teams will have, what Pittsburgh does is you have to look at what third down you're in. I kind of feel like it's a little unfair to talk about the Bengals offense in the same way that you talk about what's going on with the Steelers. They just came off of Super Bowl and they have Joe Burrow, who's a very, very proven entity, versus the type of play they're calling with the personnel they have for the Steelers. Just not the same. It's not the same quality, it feels the magnitude's a little bit different. Right. So I think both teams will look different on this. And now we'll get a chance to see, right? Like who's getting right here, because this could be it could go either way. And I think that in this case, I think the defense here will have a good game plan for what the Steelers are bringing.
Do you think that the 10 days, not even rest, more for the coaching staff, like you think that is a legitimate advantage in terms of then for the Steelers now playing the Jets, who have their standard week of rest, where the Steelers have a couple more days?
Yeah, I think it's helpful, but it's very early in the season. So, if you want it, that where the 10 days makes a little bit more sense is once we kind of know what we're looking at from these teams. This year, more than any year, we don't know. It is very hard to see what you're looking at, in part because there have been so many injuries, and in part because a lot of huge name players, not just big name players, but huge name players in key positions. We had more quarterbacks move, more big name wide receivers move. There was just a lot of change. So I don't even know if we know the identity of teams yet. And in doing so, then it's not that it's not helpful. It's just that it's not as helpful as if you had it like week 11, week 12, when you have a little bit of an opportunity. Oh, we know who these Packers are. Oh, we know who these whatever are, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. It's just, I feel like that's something that a lot of fans will point to. They'll be like, well, the Steelers are coming off 10 days rest. Actually, then the next week, the Jets have the Dolphins, who are also playing on Thursday Night Football this week, which means they will also be coming off 10 days rest. So just something to think about if you're a Jets fan, what Cynthia just said, which brings us to our fourth quarter. The skill players, both teams. You mentioned Deontay Johnson. He's an underrated player, I think, to your point. And that core between him, Chase Claypool, and George Pickens, very talented. What do Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed need to expect from those guys? And obviously, we talked about the offensive line struggles, so it feels like this could, again, be a good matchup for the Jets.
Well, first of all, we need to point out that the week after we ate Sauce's sauce on chicken, he had, 2 pass breakups. He stopped a crucial 4th and 1 run. I mean, the Jets held Jamar Chase in check. 29 yards last I checked. That's not a lot. It's the third fewest he's had in his career in a game. So, there's a lot to like there. And I'm not going to say it's because we ate the sauce, but there's no evidence to support.
But you're saying it. You're saying it.
No, I mean, we can't prove that it's not because we ate the sauce.
That's a great point. I think we had something to do with it. I think we did. I think we should give ourselves some credit.
It's just, listen, it's all these tiny little things, just add them all up together and eventually you get something great. Anyways, but
yeah,
no.
But you were impressed with the way he played. I mean, obviously, how could you not be? That was like one of the silver linings of the game, even though the result wasn't what the team wanted.
I mean, look, you got to look at individual performances here because they add up to a lot. And remember, the Bengals were coming off of a weird situation, and they're still the Super Bowl runners up. Like it's not like, they're not a totally different team this season. So that is a quality loss. Like if you're going to take an L to a quality team, right? Like it's unfortunate to lose it all, but it's not like you're sitting here being like, and we lost to a team who we were supposed to beat by 15 points. Not happening. Right. So
I was just going to say sorry to cut you off. I didn't mean to do that, but on the flip side for the Steelers, this is an advantage for the Jets, right? The Steelers corners. You talked about Minka, but the Steelers corners, are they one of the areas of potential exploitment for this Jets receiving core?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the corners certainly are. So, say first on the side with George Pickens and how they're going to defend this team, I think there'll probably be a lot of sauce on Deontay Johnson, just because I do think if you track Johnson's routes and his ability to create separation, he is the most open one, right, so far through 3 games. So that does feel like something that matters. George Pickens we saw in preseason, he had some pretty spectacular catches, and he's fun to watch. So, but I don't think he's as much of a threat. Neither is Chase Claypool. So I do think that in the case of adding together the O-line with the passer, we're assuming it's Mitch Trubisky, obviously, and then I think it's actually advantage for in many ways here for what the Jets do best: bring some pressure and then back it up with good play at the corner position.
It's interesting. Just looking at the height advantages in terms of receiver corner. George Pickens is a big guy. I remember seeing him at the combine and being like, wow, this is a very large human. He's 6'3". If he were to line up against DJ Reed, who's 5'9", like that could be a potential mismatch. But DJ Reed game in and game out, season over season, has shown that it doesn't matter how tall you are. He hangs with the best of them. I saw a tweet today that said he has the second lowest passer rating allowed in man coverage. PFF put that out there. And so he's been great along with Sauce, which means that the Jets have, at least so far this season, and the numbers kind of show it, have been able to devote a little more to the run game, which has improved that average. The Jets rank 6th in the NFL in terms of rushing yards allowed per carry. And we've seen that compared to last season where it definitely was not that number. But then when we talk about this Jets skill player group, we talked about how revamped it is potentially with Zach Wilson. You mentioned Tyler Conklin. Is this the area where the Jets need to exploit in order to have a chance to win Sunday, the secondary minus Minkah Fitzpatrick?
Well, yes, and stay away from Minkah Fitzpatrick. But apart from that, it is definitely the area. Plus, you've already seen this offense use a diversity of pass catchers. The Jets actually lead the NFL with 6 different players that have at least 10 receptions. So that's the most different. Okay, this is bad English. The most different pass catchers. Yes, maybe that's right. Anyways, they have the most people who are whatever, the most people with at least double-digit receptions in the league. So you're seeing them mix up the different looks, and that's an advantage, especially that, it feels like without TJ Watt, there's an opportunity to have just a tick more time, and then that will create some opportunity for separation. We've seen Garrett Wilson be awesome at creating separation, and I think that will continue kind of with the whole theme of everything. You just it's way easier to throw the ball at someone if they're open.
Yeah, I'm no professional, but what you just said makes a lot of sense to me. One thing that numbers, I don't know if they have an answer or any kind of indicator, is home field advantage. The Pittsburgh Steelers fan base definitely very dedicated and devoted. The Jets, I think, kind of saw some of that in Cleveland. That was their home opener, the Cleveland Browns. The Jets' miraculous comeback in week 2. Is there any number or anything that has anything to do with home field advantage in terms of regular season game? Because I don't feel like there is, which then leads me to part 2 is, what is your take on the Pittsburgh Steelers home field advantage?
So part of, it was this whole thing about like, oh, Ben Roethlisberger at home, it's a thing, right? Like, but the reality is that's the important part. Ben Roethlisberger at home. And you have to also remember, look at the schedule, who they played week before. The home field advantage is good for sound and things like penalties and things like, making people, like when they're doing this a lot, like I can't hear, right? But it's not necessarily like in a vacuum, not super helpful. Weather does matter. There are some things that do provide some level of advantage. It's just very hard to use that same set of data and data points with a different quarterback. They've had the same quarterback for forever. So Now that they have a change, I don't know if I think that like advantage is as strong. Certainly the noise level is strong, but the Jets have that with all of their away games, and every team has that with all of their away games. So I don't know if it's not quite as pronounced there. It's not as loud as Seattle. It's not quite as pronounced as, like, we'll see. How about that? We'll see.
I guess we will see. We'll see on Sunday, week 4. Also, when you did this, it made me think of earmuffs from old school. But that's another thing that the Jets offensive line is going to have to work through, because if they got some mix-ups, obviously without George Fant in the lineup, they have players who have played in prior games like Connor McDermott, but we might see some of this on Sunday, the earmuffs. But that's really all I have. That concludes our fourth quarter. Is there anything else that you want to throw out there before, whether it's football related or not, before we wrap up?
I mean, I think you need to have Tyler Conklin on your fantasy team if you don't. Because first of all, he's tight end number 3 through right now in points.
That's pretty good. I would say so.
Good.
Yeah.
And number 2,
is that PPR league just for those
PPR.
watching at home? Okay.
PPR. Yes. I don't know the scoring for non-PPR. I don't know, whatever. I just stopped paying attention.
Me neither, but I do know it exists.
I do. Yeah. I can't be bothered with that. But no, but I think that people forget that, like the Garrett Wilson too. So you got to go pick these guys up if you don't have them on your fantasy team, because then not only do you get to play with good players, but also it's players that are you get to be a fan of. Like, this is a win-win situation here.
How's your fantasy team doing before we wrap up here?
Which one? I'm in a few too many leagues this year.
Okay.
But
how many leagues are you in?
4, which is down from the 8 that I was in last year. But
whoa, that 4 is a lot.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm on a show called Fantasy Live, so I guess I have to should probably figure it out. But it's interesting. But I do think like my good strategy for go pick up Tyler Conklin, because like other people have buys, and tight end is something where people be like, oh, and if he's available, people will steal him. So go stash him now, and I'm a big fan of that. It's like big proponent of that. Go stash him.
I think it's a great idea. And if you're a fantasy player and you're listening to that, there you go. It's free advice. I remember last week we said that we were going to give free business advice. That's maybe like, that could be a metaphorical business decision if you have some dollar bills involved in your fantasy league.
I agree. I'm trying to think if we have any good business. Would you have any good business advice this week? What are you bringing with?
No, my best business advice this week would be don't pay retail for anything, because there's always some kind of coupon. There's always some kind of free shipping code. There's always something. And so that's where I stand. That's where I stand. You don't pay 100% for it unless maybe it's food or something. But even then, maybe not.
Yeah, no, I definitely, I abide by that. I did that thing, we talked about CVS before. I did that thing where I had the coupon and I spent right up to whatever the limit was to get all of it off. And it felt so good. Yeah. So satisfying. I was like,
you mean like
I get these staples for less.
Yeah. You mean like when you scan the thing at the end and all the numbers start coming off, and then
and it's like,
it's an adrenaline rush.
I know. It's like, it's magic. It's great.
That's a great
fighting
way.
Inflation one CVS coupon at a time,
That is the right way to go about it, I think. And that is the perfect way to end the Game Preview Podcast. Week 4, Jets Steelers in Pittsburgh, as the Jets have a chance to go 2-2 through their first 4 games. Of course, Zach Wilson, a likely chance, or maybe not likely.
I hope he does it. Come on.
Yeah, we hope he does. I'm going to say likely to put the good juju out there. Yeah, medically cleared. Just hoping that all goes well this week, like Robert Saleh said, which means that we'll get to see Zach Wilson in year 2 make his debut. That rhymes, and that's how we end this episode.
Wait. We have to.
Uh-oh.
Okay.
Yeah.
I love when people throw touchdowns to people who have the same last name.
I see. So you're saying a little Zach to Garrett Wilson connection?
I mean, listen, it's funny. It's just all funny. Like it's all fun.
Yeah.
I like when Josh Allen sacks Josh Allen. Not that I want anyone to get hurt or whatever. I like when people with the same name, like when stuff Wilson to Wilson Pat. So what do you think you do the talking for a living? What would be your call if that when that happens?
Like how would I distinguish them, or what would?
No, so obviously last week you saw Sauce go up against Jamar Chase, and I think it was. Who was on the call? Was it my
it was
guy,
Iron Eagle.
I love Iron Eagle.
Me too.
He was like one in a battle of 1 versus 1, and it was great. So what's your call going to be when it's Wilson to Wilson touchdown pass?
So Greg Gumbel, I believe, is on the call this week, and he will do a much better job of what I would do. But if I were on the call, I would probably say something along the lines of Wilson finds the other Wilson or something like that. And then that's kind of where my mind is going off the top. If I had more time to prepare, I could probably come up with something a little better.
Yeah.
But
well, listen, I put you on the spot here, but I think it's worth thinking about, because you're going to need to come up with the right thing here, so that,
you're right.
Because there's a lot of famous Wilson things that you could tie into this. So yeah. I don't know. Just be. I'm putting this on you. I do the math, you do the talking. Right.
That teamwork makes the dream work. That's it, right? You get the math, I get the linguistics. Come together. Game Preview Podcast. There you
Perfect.
go. Which leads me to say, rate us, subscribe, YouTube, Spotify.
Yep. Everywhere. All
comment, everything. And now that I'm thinking about it, last question: do you like Wilson to the other Wilson, or Wilson to the younger Wilson better?
Well, the fact that they're both pretty young is funny.
I know. I was just Googling their age just to make sure that they are younger.
Yeah, because it's possible that you never know these people with the ages. So I mean, I like both of those. I feel like though, like given your level of creativity with a little bit of thought, I feel like you could like, there's like, there's obviously like there's references from like, a Tom Hanks movie. There's references like to tennis. There's references. There's a lot of things Wilson can do here. There's a lot of directions. Mr. Wilson, like from Dennis the Menace, like you've got a lot of different ways that you could play this. So I'm just trying to think like what would be the most New York of Wilsons. Like maybe people will write in the comments. Like maybe that's something they can reply to us with.
Yeah, I would like that because now that I'm hearing you say all this stuff, I'm like, wow, my fake call of the Zach to Garrett Wilson touchdown was bad.
It's not
sucked.
bad. No, definitely not. Like you just gotta like, I just feel like my expectations are high because I just know how good you are. So
I appreciate that. Untapped potential. I see you're making me
untapped.
trying to reach my potential with the call.
No, it's not untapped. It's totally tapped. Did you listen to the rest of this pod? You did great. But this is just coming up. This is prep for the game. That's all.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I think that I'm going to have to come up with something, and then for me, it might have to be in tweet form. But
Perfect.
if I think of something, I will let you know, and then I will let everybody else know because I think we're on to something.
We certainly are.
Okay, great. Well, thank you again for joining us earlier on the West Coast. Not that early. It's probably kind of late for you.
It's fine. It's
early for chicken and barbecue sauce, though.
We've done these before when it's been like pitch black. The sun is fully up. We're good.
Okay. Sun's out, always in California. It's a little chillier here, but that's okay. I like it. You probably missed the leaves turning to some degree.
I do. But then once it gets to December, I'm like, yeah, no, don't miss it anymore. Done.
Yeah, that's it. And that's how we end this podcast. Cynthia, I hope you have a wonderful week, and we'll see what happens this Sunday, and then we'll talk to you next week.
Perfect.